What happens when the system you trust to protect you is the same one that destroys lives? In a city built on corruption, Officer Ethan Carter has everything: power, privilege, and a badge that makes him untouchable. But when he pulls over Colonel Alana Briggs, a woman with an untold past, his world begins to crack. Little does he know, this woman is the spark that will set his entire empire of lies on fire. His rise to power has been swift, but in the blink of an eye, everything he thought he controlled is about to slip through his fingers, and he won't be able to stop it. The night was cold, the air sharp as Officer Ethan Carter adjusted the collar of his uniform. A smirk played across his clean-shaven face, reflecting a cocky confidence that only someone who had climbed the ranks as fast as he had could wear. 6 months on the force, 6 months of unrelenting ambition, and already, Carter had the world figured out. His badge, gleaming with authority, wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a shield that made him untouchable. Or so he thought. Carter had learned quickly that power wasn't just about the badge. It was about knowing which doors to knock on, which targets to choose, and which lives were worth ruining. He had been mentored by veteran Officer James Wilson, a man who had taught him the real power dynamics of law enforcement. Out here, kid, we're the law. Some people just need to learn their place, Wilson had told him, words that still echoed in Carter's mind. Power. That was what Carter had sought, and he was getting it. His reports were always approved, his methods unquestioned. He had the right allies, the right handshakes, and most importantly, the right targets. Carter's rise had been swift, and his success was almost inevitable. The system worked like a machine, every part functioning in harmony. For Carter, the system was not just the law. It was the ultimate source of power, and he was going to exploit it to its fullest. Tonight was another routine operation, another quota to fulfill, another night to justify the precinct's inflated crime statistics. Oakbrook was one of the wealthiest districts in the city. Pristine lawns, gated communities, and manicured streets that screamed privilege. But there were always undesirables lurking in these areas, and the precinct needed to show that it was doing its job. That's where Carter came in. His patrol car cruised silently through the well-lit streets, his eyes scanning for anyone who didn't belong. It was almost midnight, the perfect time for a traffic stop, quiet streets, no distractions. Carter's radio crackled with routine chatter, but it was nothing more than background noise. He had done this so many times before, it was almost second nature. And then, something caught his eye. A sleek black Range Rover appeared in his rearview mirror. It was too clean, too perfect. There was no reason for a car like that to be out on these streets at this time of night. The driver was alone, a woman by the looks of it. Something about the vehicle's spotless exterior and the driver's calm, confident posture rubbed Carter the wrong way. His instincts told him that something wasn't right. Without hesitation, Carter flipped on his sirens, the sound echoing through the stillness of the neighborhood. The Range Rover pulled over smoothly, no sudden movements. It was almost as if the driver had been expecting it. As Carter approached the driver's side window, he saw her, a woman in her late 30s, dressed in a tailored business suit that likely cost more than his entire paycheck. She sat with perfect posture, hands calmly gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2. License and registration, Carter demanded, not bothering with the usual pleasantries. His voice was sharp, rehearsed, and filled with authority. He had dealt with people like her before. Wealthy, untouchable, the kind who thought they could get away with anything. And now, Carter had the power to remind her of her place. The woman didn't flinch. She handed over her documents with a grace that seemed almost deliberate. Her voice was calm, cultured, but with an edge that sent a chill down Carter's spine. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" he asked, his tone dripping with practiced authority. "No, officer, I don't," she replied evenly. "You were swerving back there. Have you been drinking tonight?" Carter's eyes narrowed as he watched her. This was his moment to assert his control, to put this woman in her place. But instead of the expected confrontation, she remained composed, her gaze never wavering from his. "I wasn't swerving, officer," she said, her voice unwavering. "And I don't drink. Your dash cam will confirm both facts." The challenge in her voice made Carter's blood boil. Nobody questioned him. Not in Oakbrook, not in his precinct, and certainly not someone like her. His jaw tightened, and his hand hovered near his radio. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am," he commanded, his voice now laced with frustration. The woman's dark eyes locked onto his, studying him as if she could see through the layers of his uniform, past the badge he wore. "On what grounds?" she asked, her voice still measured, almost too calm. "Step out of the vehicle now," Carter repeated, his tone sharp. "Unless you want to add resisting an officer to whatever else we find." There was a long pause. The woman didn't move. Her posture remained perfect, but there was a quiet authority in her stillness that unnerved him. "Officer Carter, I'm going to remove my seatbelt now. Please don't mistake any of my movements as threatening," she said, her words measured, deliberate. Before he could respond, Carter keyed his radio. "Dispatch, I need backup. Subject appears aggressive." Within minutes, 2 more patrol cars arrived, their lights flashing and alternating red and blue. Officers Mike Taylor and Brad Foster stepped out, hands resting casually on their weapons, already knowing the drill. "What seems to be the problem here?" Taylor asked, his voice dripping with feigned concern. Carter's nerves were beginning to show. She was swerving, possibly intoxicated. "Now she's being uncooperative," he explained, though his words lacked the usual confidence. Foster moved to the passenger side of the car, while Taylor flanked Carter. The intimidation factor, the numbers, it had always been enough to break people. But Alana, as Carter would come to know her, was different. She remained still, her expression unchanging, her voice calm. "Officers," she began, "I understand you have a job to do. However, I want to make it clear that any actions you take right now are being recorded, not just by your body cameras, but also by my own." Carter laughed, unable to mask the irritation in his voice. "Is that a threat, ma'am?" "No, officer," she replied, her voice steady. "Just a statement of fact." The calm challenge in her words stung, but Carter wasn't ready to back down. "Out of the vehicle now." Alana complied, but her movements were slow, deliberate. Carter was now convinced that she was doing this just to provoke him. But when she stood and turned, her height matching his, and her posture radiating an aura of quiet authority, Carter felt something shift within him. This wasn't just another traffic stop. This wasn't just another quota operation. Something about this was different. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Alana didn't resist. She didn't shout. She simply looked at Carter, her dark eyes filled with quiet certainty. "I look forward to discussing this in court, officer," she said, her voice calm and controlled, as though she already knew exactly how this would play out. The city streets were alive with the hum of late-night activity, but Officer Ethan Carter felt disconnected from it all. He had everything figured out: his badge, his connections, his place in the system. As a 6-month rookie on the force, he had already climbed faster than anyone expected, outpacing his peers in every way. It wasn't about doing what was right. It was about power. And Carter had learned that lesson well that night. His patrol car glided through the Oakbrook district, the city's wealthiest neighborhood, where pristine lawns met high gates, and the air felt unnervingly calm. Just before midnight, Carter's gaze caught a glint in his rearview mirror, an expensive black Range Rover. The vehicle was too flawless for this hour. Clean, with no sign of the typical nighttime grime that coated other cars. And as it glided effortlessly through the streets, Carter's instincts screamed that something was off. A quick glance confirmed his suspicions. The driver, a woman, sat too straight in her seat, too composed. There was no sign of tension, no flicker of fear that most people exhibited when pulled over. Just calm. Too calm. Something wasn't right. Without hesitation, Carter flicked on his sirens. The Range Rover pulled over smoothly, the engine purring as it came to a stop. No struggle. No sudden movements. Nothing unusual. He approached the driver's side with his hand resting on his holstered weapon. His training officer, James Wilson's words echoed in his mind. "Out here, we are the law. Some people just need to learn their place." He wasn't afraid. He was in control. When Carter reached the window, the woman inside stared at him with cold, unwavering eyes. She was poised, dressed in an expensive black suit, her posture impeccable. The type of woman who had probably never been in trouble with the law. That realization made Carter's blood boil. He was supposed to be the one in charge, the one to hold power. "License and registration," he demanded, his voice cold and sharp. No pleasantries. The woman, Alana Briggs, handed over her documents without a word. He wasn't used to people acting so calm in the face of authority. And when she spoke next, her voice wasn't what he expected. It was steady, cultured, and surprisingly calm. "Do you know why I pulled you over, officer?" Carter demanded. "No, officer, I don't," she replied with a hint of sarcasm. But the challenge in her voice sent a wave of frustration crashing into Carter's chest. This wasn't supposed to be hard. "You were swerving back there," he said, as if the words had already been rehearsed. "Have you been drinking tonight?" Alana's response was immediate, cutting through the tension like a knife. "I wasn't swerving, officer. And I don't drink. You can check the dash cam. It'll confirm both of those facts." Her eyes were fixed on his badge, challenging him without saying a word. Her voice, calm and unwavering, only made his grip on the situation slip further. Something inside Carter snapped. Nobody, especially not someone like her, questioned him. Not in his city. Not in his precinct. "Step out of the vehicle," Carter ordered, his tone turning darker. His grip tightened around the radio, a signal to his fellow officers. He wasn't about to let her get away with disrespect. Alana's gaze didn't shift. She didn't flinch or raise her voice. "On what grounds?" she asked, her tone steady. "You've already told me why you stopped me, officer. But now you're asking me to step out of my vehicle? What's the charge?" Her words weren't just a challenge. They were a direct threat to his authority. And Carter couldn't stand it. "I said step out of the vehicle," he repeated, his voice low, his hand now resting on the radio. He felt his power slipping away, and he wasn't ready to let that happen. Alana studied him for a moment, her dark eyes unblinking. "I will remove my seatbelt now. Please don't mistake any of my movements as threatening." She said it so calmly that Carter could feel the anger bubbling under the surface, like a boiling kettle. But he couldn't back down. Not in front of his fellow officers. Carter keyed his radio, calling for backup. "I need backup at my location. Subject appears aggressive." Within minutes, 2 more patrol cars pulled up, their flashing lights illuminating the street. Officers Mike Taylor and Brad Foster emerged, hands resting casually on their weapons. They were Carter's usual backup, part of the machine. They had done this countless times before, the intimidation factor enough to break anyone. But Alana was unshaken. "What seems to be the problem here?" Taylor asked, the false concern in his voice obvious. Carter, still seething, replied, "Subject was swerving, possibly intoxicated. Now she's being uncooperative." Alana remained calm. "I understand you have a job to do. However, I want to make it clear that any actions you take are being recorded, not just by your cameras, but by mine as well." Carter couldn't believe it. "Is that a threat, ma'am?" He laughed, but the challenge in her voice only made his blood boil further. "No, officer," Alana replied, her voice measured, deliberate. "Just a statement of fact." Carter's frustration reached a breaking point, and without warning, he reached for her door handle and yanked it open. "Out of the vehicle now," he barked, losing his patience. Alana complied slowly, her movements deliberate, controlled. She stepped out of the vehicle, towering over Carter as she stood to her full height. She wasn't intimidated by the badge, the uniform, or the backup. She made it clear with every step. "Turn around. Hands behind your back," Foster ordered. "I'm assuming I'm under arrest?" Alana asked, her voice a perfect combination of calm and intelligence. Carter gripped her arm roughly, spinning her around to slap the handcuffs on. "Driving under the influence, resisting arrest," he muttered under his breath. The cuffs clicked into place, and as they did, Alana simply looked him in the eyes and stated, "I look forward to discussing this in court, officer." For the first time in his career, Carter wasn't sure what was happening. His world was spinning out of control. This wasn't supposed to be difficult. This wasn't supposed to be anyone else's fight, but his. As they drove her to the precinct, Carter's mind raced. This woman, with her calm demeanor, her unwavering confidence, she was a threat, one he had never anticipated. And the worst part? He wasn't sure if he had made the right call. The arrest had gone according to plan, but something about Alana Briggs didn't add up. Was she really just another person to add to the statistics? Or was she something more? Carter was about to find out the hard way. The precinct was buzzing with activity when Officer Ethan Carter arrived, his mind swirling with confusion and a gnawing sense of unease. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had followed protocol, executed his duties as instructed, and yet, something about this arrest, something about Alana Briggs, felt wrong. The usual process seemed too smooth, too easy, almost as if it had been staged. He threw his keys on the desk and rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the sense of impending disaster. He had done everything by the book. She had resisted, right? She had been uncooperative, had tried to challenge his authority at every turn. Yet, why was it that every time he replayed the arrest in his mind, he couldn't shake the memory of her calm, collected demeanor? The booking area was bustling with officers processing paperwork, but Carter felt isolated, like he was sinking deeper into a pit. Sergeant Frank Walsh was waiting for him, his face expressionless as usual. He waved Carter over to the desk. "Carter," he barked, his voice low, "get it together. We're putting this one behind us. She's just another name on the list. She's not special." Carter nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. The report was already being filled out, the usual charges noted: driving under the influence, resisting arrest. The fabricated narrative was already in motion. Carter had to follow the script, stick to the story. The precinct's machine ran on a system of lies, and he had been part of that system for too long to question it now. But the weight of the night's events pressed heavily on him. He had expected to feel vindicated after the arrest. After all, the system was on his side. The backing of his fellow officers, the precinct, and the higher-ups ensured that his record would stay clean. No one would second-guess him. Yet here he was, staring at a blank form, wondering how it had all gone wrong. The unease gnawed at him like a splinter lodged deep under his skin. Alana Briggs was no ordinary civilian. She had known exactly how to respond, how to remain unfazed, even when the full force of the precinct came down on her. It wasn't just her calm exterior, it was the challenge in her voice, the way she held her ground without ever raising her voice or losing her composure. Carter picked up his pen, trying to focus on the task at hand. But his mind kept drifting back to the moment when he had handcuffed her, when her eyes met his with an unsettling confidence. She had known something he didn't, and for the first time, Carter felt like he was the one being played. The door to the booking area creaked open, and Lieutenant Thomas Brooks stepped inside. His sharp eyes scanned the room, noting the usual bustle of activity. He locked eyes with Carter for a moment, the unspoken weight of their shared history hanging in the air. Then, without a word, Brooks turned and walked toward the back office. Carter hesitated for a moment before following. Inside, the tension was palpable. Brooks looked over at Carter, his expression unreadable. "We're handling this one differently," he said, his voice cold. "I don't care what the report says. We're not going to press the charges. Just get her through the system and forget about it." Carter blinked, his confusion deepening. "Sir, but the charges, forget it, Carter," Brooks snapped. "This one's a problem we don't need. Just file the report and move on. No more complications." As Brooks spoke, Carter felt a chill run down his spine. Why was this happening? Why were they telling him to ignore the standard procedure? It wasn't like anything he had ever encountered before. There was something off about Alana Briggs, something beyond her calm demeanor. He had been told to take down the powerful, to put the right people in their place. But Alana? She wasn't like the others. He left the office feeling like he had been dismissed, his questions unanswered. But that feeling of unease lingered, gnawing at him like an itch he couldn't scratch. Something about Alana was different, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the night's events were setting something much bigger into motion. Hours passed, and the precinct began to wind down for the night. The usual hum of activity settled into a low murmur as officers wrapped up their shifts. Carter found himself sitting alone at his desk, staring at his phone. The messages from his fellow officers were coming in faster now, congratulating him on the arrest, on the smooth operation, on doing his part in keeping the city safe. But Carter couldn't bring himself to feel pride. He couldn't even bring himself to answer the messages. His thoughts kept returning to Alana. What was she really doing here? She wasn't just another citizen caught in the system. She was different. And the more Carter thought about her calm, measured responses, the more he realized how much he had underestimated her. He needed to know more. He needed answers. Without thinking, he grabbed his jacket and headed out of the precinct. He needed to clear his head, to make sense of everything. The cool night air hit him as soon as he stepped outside, but it didn't bring any relief. It was as if the world had shifted, and Carter was standing in the middle of a storm, trying to figure out which way to run. He walked the streets aimlessly, trying to work through the knots in his mind. As he passed the familiar streets of Oakbrook, the place he had patrolled so many times before, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in on him. The clean, pristine neighborhood had always been a place of wealth and privilege, where the system seemed to protect its own. But tonight, it felt like the shadows were deeper, darker. Then, his phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Sergeant Wilson, the man who had been his mentor in the force, the one who had taught him all the tricks of the trade. Carter had always trusted Wilson. He had believed that his mentor had his back. But the message sent a chill down his spine. "We need to talk. Meet me at the usual spot. This one's bigger than you think." Carter felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He knew exactly where Wilson meant. It was the old diner on the edge of town, a place where cops could meet in private, away from prying eyes. Carter's instincts screamed at him to ignore the message, to walk away. But his curiosity, his desire to understand what was really going on, was too strong. As he made his way to the diner, the weight of the night hung heavily on his shoulders. Whatever Wilson had to say, whatever new truth was about to come to light, it wasn't going to be easy. But Carter had always been about doing what it took to get ahead. If he wanted to stay ahead, he needed to face whatever was coming, no matter how dark it might be. The diner's neon lights flickered dimly in the cold night as Carter parked his car and stepped out. The familiar scent of coffee and grease filled the air, but tonight, nothing about this place felt comforting. He walked up to the door, the weight of the message still fresh in his mind. Wilson's words echoed in his thoughts. "This one's bigger than you think." Carter had been with the force long enough to know that the moment someone used that line, it meant trouble. Serious trouble. But what could be bigger than this? What was so important about Alana Briggs, a woman who had been nothing more than a routine traffic stop? Carter had been taught that justice was black and white, simple to execute. But this situation, it was becoming a storm of gray. Inside, the diner was nearly empty. Only a few late-night workers hunched over their meals, the hum of quiet conversation filling the air. Wilson sat in a corner booth, his back turned to the door. As Carter approached, Wilson didn't even look up, his fingers slowly tapping on the edge of his coffee cup. "Wilson," Carter said, his voice steady but tinged with suspicion. "What's going on?" Wilson finally raised his head, his eyes dark and tired. The smile he usually wore was gone, replaced by something far more serious. "Carter," he began, his voice low and measured. "I'm not sure how to tell you this, but you need to listen to me. There's something you don't know about this case, about the woman you arrested." Carter sat down across from him, every muscle in his body tense. "What do you mean? What's the deal with Alana Briggs?" "She was a threat, and I did what I had to do." Wilson's eyes narrowed, and he leaned in closer, as if the very air around them had thickened. "That's what they want you to believe. But she's not just some random target, Carter. She's part of something much bigger. And you've walked straight into it." Carter frowned, his mind racing. "What are you talking about?" "I followed procedure. She was uncooperative, aggressive. That's why she's in custody." "That's not the truth," Wilson interjected, his tone hardening. "The truth is that Alana Briggs is connected to a network, a very dangerous one. You think you've been helping the city's justice system. What if I told you it's all been a lie? What if I told you the system itself is corrupt, that it's been used for something far more sinister than you could ever imagine?" Carter's chest tightened, the words threatening to suffocate him. "You're saying I'm part of something illegal?" Wilson took a long pause, his expression grave. "You've been a tool, Carter. A pawn in a game much bigger than you realize. Alana is part of a network exposing systemic corruption that runs deep in this precinct. The people who control this city, they control everything. They've been hiding their real operations for years, and now they're pulling you into it." Carter's mind swirled as the implications began to settle in. He had seen corruption, yes. He'd witnessed it firsthand. But this was different. He had no idea what was really going on. He thought he understood the rules of the game, but Wilson's words made it clear that the game was rigged, and Carter was just another pawn. "How do you know all this?" Carter asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you know about Alana?" Wilson hesitated before answering. "I've been in this system long enough to know when something doesn't add up. When I heard about her, I did some digging. The woman you arrested is a part of something that could bring this whole precinct down. You're not the first to fall into this trap. I was in deep too, Carter. But I managed to get out before it swallowed me whole." Carter leaned forward, his hands clenched into fists. "And what do you want from me? You drag me here, tell me everything is a lie, but I don't know what to believe anymore." Wilson's eyes softened for a moment. "I'm telling you the truth because it's the only chance you have left. If you keep playing their game, you're going to end up just like me, a part of the system you once thought you were fighting for. You have to make a choice, Carter. You can stay loyal to this corrupt system, or you can help us take it down." The words hit Carter like a freight train. He had always believed in justice, had always been proud of the badge he wore. But the truth was now laid out in front of him, and it was undeniable. Everything he had been taught, everything he had believed, was starting to unravel. I don't know what to do," Carter admitted, his voice shaky. "I don't know who to trust anymore." "You're telling me I've been working for the wrong side all along?" Wilson sighed heavily. "That's the hardest part, Carter. When you've been in too deep for too long, you lose sight of the truth. But you still have a choice. You can walk away from this, help us expose what's really going on, or you can stay, continue doing their bidding, and risk losing everything." Carter stared down at the table, his hands trembling. He had always seen the world in black and white, right and wrong. But now, there were no clear answers. The lines were blurred, and he didn't know which direction to take. A sudden noise outside the diner door interrupted the silence. The sound of footsteps, heavy and purposeful. Carter's instincts kicked in. He stood up quickly, scanning the room. Wilson followed his gaze, his face tightening with concern. "Get out of here, Carter," Wilson whispered urgently. "They're already watching you. You don't have much time." Carter's heart raced as he grabbed his jacket and hurried toward the back exit. He didn't look back, didn't dare. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on him, but he knew he couldn't stay here any longer. He had no idea who was after him, but he could feel the danger closing in. As Carter slipped into the alley behind the diner, his mind raced. He needed answers, but where could he go for the truth? Alana had been a part of the system he had sworn to protect, but now, it seemed like she was the key to everything. The web of corruption was vast, and it was clear that Carter was now tangled in it, and just like that, the certainty he once had about his purpose in life shattered. Carter was no longer just a cop. He was a man on the run, chasing the truth through a maze of lies that stretched further than he could ever have imagined. The choice was his now. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. There was no going back. The cold wind bit through Carter's jacket as he hurried down the alley. His breath came in quick bursts, his heart pounding against his chest. Every step felt heavier, as if the weight of the truth was sinking deeper into his bones. He had always been proud of the badge he wore. It had symbolized justice, power, and authority. But now, it felt like a curse, an albatross that threatened to pull him under. He reached the street corner, glancing around nervously. His mind spun with Wilson's words. The system he had devoted his life to, his entire career, was corrupt. How had he been so blind? Had he truly believed that the justice he fought for was real? Or had he been just another pawn in a twisted game, manipulated by those in power? Carter took a deep breath and tried to calm himself. He couldn't afford to panic. Not now. He needed answers. He needed to find out what had really been happening, who was pulling the strings, and how deep this corruption went. As he stepped onto the main road, he spotted a familiar car parked across the street. It was Wilson's car, dark, inconspicuous, just like the man himself. Carter hesitated. Should he confront Wilson? Demand more answers? Or should he find Alana? If what Wilson had said was true, Alana was the key to exposing the truth. She had to know more. The decision weighed on him, but he knew there was no turning back now. He had been dragged into this mess whether he liked it or not. He couldn't run away. He had to stand up and make it right. Without another thought, Carter crossed the street and made his way toward Wilson's car. As he approached, the door to the vehicle swung open, and Wilson stepped out, looking more serious than ever. His face was a grim mask, his eyes scanning the surroundings before meeting Carter's. "You made the right choice," Wilson said quietly, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "You're in this now, Carter, and there's no going back." Carter's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean? You've been telling me about all this corruption, but I still don't get it. What exactly are we dealing with here?" Wilson looked around one last time, then motioned for Carter to follow him down the street. They needed to talk in private. You don't get it yet, do you? This whole city, this whole precinct, it's been built on lies. It's a machine that operates without conscience. The people at the top have used their power to exploit the system for years, and no one ever dared to question it. They stopped in front of an old, abandoned building, its windows dark and shattered. Wilson glanced up at it, as if weighing the decision to speak further. Inside, you'll find the truth. Everything you need to understand what's really been going on. I can't tell you everything here, but you'll see for yourself. It's the only way to fully comprehend the depth of the corruption. Carter's stomach churned. He wasn't sure what Wilson meant, but he knew there was no backing out now. He had to know. He had to understand the full extent of the lies that had been spun around him for years. "Let's go," Carter said, his voice steady, though his nerves were on edge. He had no idea what awaited him inside that building, but the truth was a weight he could no longer ignore. He followed Wilson through a side door, into a dark hallway lit only by the dim glow of a flickering overhead light. Wilson led him down a narrow corridor, passing rusted doors and peeling wallpaper, until they reached a small office at the end. The door creaked as Wilson pushed it open, revealing a cluttered space filled with files, documents, and various pieces of equipment. In the center of the room sat a desk, and on top of it was a laptop, its screen aglow with data. "This is where it all starts," Wilson said, his voice low. "Every arrest, every case you've worked on, there's been something else behind it. People disappear, Carter, and the system lets it happen." Carter's heart skipped a beat as he stepped closer to the desk. He could feel the weight of the room closing in on him. The documents before him were stacked high, pages filled with names, dates, and case numbers. But it wasn't just any paperwork. These were arrest records, records of people who had disappeared without a trace. "These are the people I've arrested," Carter muttered, his voice shaking as he flipped through the pages. What happened to them?" Wilson nodded gravely. "They were never really arrested. At least not in the way you think. They were taken, disappeared, shipped off to facilities you can't even imagine. Places where the law doesn't apply, where the people in power use their authority to profit from human lives." Carter's breath caught in his throat as the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. This is what they've been hiding. This is what Alana was trying to expose. Wilson met his gaze, his eyes dark with the weight of everything they had just uncovered. Yes, and now, it's too late to go back. The people behind this, Carter, they've built an empire. An empire that spans across the country, reaching into every corner of law enforcement and politics. They've been hiding behind badges, behind the law, using it to cover up their crimes. Carter's mind reeled as he processed the information. His whole life, everything he had believed in, was now in question. The badge he had worn with pride, the authority he had once wielded, it had all been part of the machine. A machine that crushed lives for profit. He stumbled back, his legs suddenly weak beneath him. "I was a part of this. I helped them." You didn't know?" Wilson interrupted, his voice firm. "But now you do, and you have a choice to make. You can either turn a blind eye, keep your head down, and pretend you didn't see anything. Or you can help bring this down. You can help expose the truth." Carter stood in the dim light, the weight of the decision pressing on his chest. He had always believed that justice was black and white, but now it was all gray. Everything he had fought for, everything he had believed in, had been built on a foundation of lies. "I want to help," Carter said, his voice steady now. "I can't stand by and do nothing." Wilson gave him a sharp nod. "Then we do this together. But be prepared. This won't be easy. The people we're up against have power, resources, and connections that go all the way to the top. They'll fight to protect themselves. But we're not alone in this. Alana's team is working to bring them down, and now, so are we." With that, Wilson turned and grabbed a thick file from a nearby shelf, placing it in Carter's hands. "This is everything. Names, locations, records. Everything you need to expose the corruption. It's going to be dangerous, but if we want to stop this, we have to be willing to risk everything." Carter nodded, the fire of determination igniting in his chest. He had a new purpose now. No longer just a man in uniform. He was part of something bigger, a fight for justice, for the people who had been silenced by a system of corruption. And as he looked at the file in his hands, he knew that there was no turning back now. The game had changed. The real battle was just beginning. Carter's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages of the file Wilson had handed him. His mind swirled with the weight of the information inside, each name and date searing into his consciousness. Every file represented a life, someone who had vanished without a trace. The evidence was undeniable, the truth overwhelming. His breath caught in his throat as he recognized the names of individuals he had once considered mere cases. People he had locked up, never suspecting they were part of something much larger. Wilson's voice broke through his thoughts, steady and deliberate. "This is the machine, Carter. This is what we're up against. These files, these names, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's an entire network out there, one that's been using law enforcement as its personal tool for years. But we're not powerless anymore. This ends now." Carter closed the file, feeling a sharp pang in his chest. The power that had once filled him with a sense of purpose, that badge that had made him feel untouchable, now felt like a weight, a burden too heavy to bear. He was no longer part of a system that upheld justice. He had been complicit in a system that abused it. He had helped hide the truth, and now, it was his responsibility to expose it. "We need to move quickly," Carter said, his voice low, determined. "These people are powerful. If they realize what we're doing, they'll stop at nothing to destroy us." Wilson gave a grim nod. "You're right. We don't have much time. Alana's team is already working on collecting evidence, but we need to move fast before they cover their tracks. The more people we bring in, the more they'll fight back. But this is bigger than us, Carter. This isn't just about taking down corrupt officers or crooked politicians. This is about dismantling a whole system of exploitation and cruelty. The kind of system that has been hiding in plain sight." The urgency in Wilson's voice struck Carter like a slap to the face. He had always been trained to protect the system, to uphold the law. But the law he had been serving was a lie, a cover for something much darker. And now, as he stood there, the weight of that betrayal settled into the pit of his stomach. "We need to get to Alana," Carter said, his voice resolute. "She's the key to bringing this down. We can't do this alone." Wilson glanced over his shoulder, checking for any sign of movement, then nodded. "We'll head to the safe house. Alana's already made contact with her team. They're ready for us." The two men left the room quickly, the weight of the file still fresh in Carter's hands. As they walked through the dark alley, Carter's mind raced with the consequences of what he was about to do. Every move they made was dangerous. They were risking everything, exposing themselves to those who would stop at nothing to protect their empire. The people they were about to face were ruthless. They had destroyed lives without a second thought, and now, Carter was going to help tear their empire down. The streets were eerily quiet as they made their way toward the safe house. The air was thick with tension, the silence almost suffocating. Carter could feel the weight of his decision pressing down on him. There was no going back now. The door to the safe house opened slowly as Wilson knocked, and Carter stepped inside, his mind still reeling. Alana was waiting for them in the small, dimly lit room, her expression calm but alert. "We're running out of time," she said, her voice sharp and commanding. "The people we're after know we're coming. They're already covering their tracks, erasing evidence, and they're trying to discredit us. We need to move fast, or we'll lose everything." Carter nodded, his resolve hardening. "I've seen the files. I've seen the truth. We can't let them get away with this." Alana stepped forward, her eyes locking with his. "You're right. But this isn't just about the truth, Carter. It's about the people we're fighting for, the innocent lives that have been lost, the families that have been torn apart. This is bigger than any one of us. We need to make sure that we don't just expose the corruption. We need to make sure that the people responsible pay for their crimes. And that means we have to act quickly. No more second chances." The fire in her eyes fueled Carter's determination. He had never been one to back down from a fight, and this fight was the biggest one he had ever faced. The stakes were higher than they had ever been before. He had a chance to make things right, to bring down a system that had preyed on the vulnerable, a system that had used him and others like him for its own gain. "We need to start with the people at the top," Carter said, his voice steady, his jaw clenched with determination. "We need to expose the entire network, the politicians, the judges, the officers who have been complicit in this. Once we bring them down, the rest of it will crumble." but we need to be strategic. If we rush in too fast, we'll lose everything." Alana nodded. "You're right. We've already got a team in place, but we need more evidence. We need to go after their financial records, their communications, everything that ties them to this operation. We need to make sure they can't escape. And we need to do it fast, before they can cover their tracks." Carter took a deep breath, his mind now focused. This was it. This was his chance to make amends for everything he had done, for every life he had helped ruin without knowing the truth. But now, he was part of something bigger than himself. Now, he had a chance to stop the system that had manipulated him for so long. "We'll do it," he said, his voice firm. "We'll expose them. We'll bring them down." With that, Alana gathered her team, and they set to work. Carter's role was clear. He would help gather the final pieces of evidence, using everything he knew about the system to track down the corrupt officers and officials who had helped build the empire of lies. It wouldn't be easy. They were up against a powerful enemy, one that wouldn't go down without a fight. As the hours passed, Carter worked alongside Alana and her team, gathering the evidence they needed to expose the corruption. The tension in the air was palpable, but so was the determination. They had come this far, and there was no turning back. When the final pieces of the puzzle were in place, Alana looked at Carter. "We're ready," she said. "It's time to bring them down." The dawn was just beginning to creep over the city, casting long shadows over the streets where Carter had once walked with a sense of untouchability. Now, those same streets seemed foreign, filled with the weight of his own choices, the consequences of his past. The weight of the badge that had once represented power now seemed like a symbol of his shame, a constant reminder of the system he had been part of, the lives he had helped destroy without realizing it. But today was different. Today, everything would change. Carter sat at the table in the dimly lit safe house, surrounded by the team that had come together to dismantle a corrupt system. Alana was at the front, her presence commanding yet calm, her eyes locked on him as if measuring his resolve. Behind her, the rest of the team moved with quiet efficiency, preparing for the final phase of their mission. Carter could feel the tension in the room, the weight of everything that was at stake. This wasn't just about exposing the corruption anymore. It was about taking it all down, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the truth. The truth that had been buried under decades of lies, intimidation, and exploitation. The truth that was about to break free and bring down an empire built on the suffering of countless innocent people. The plan was set. The evidence was gathered. Now, all they had to do was take the fight to those who thought they were invincible. As the final preparations were being made, Carter found himself alone for a moment, standing by the window and staring out at the city. The sun had risen fully now, casting a golden glow over the skyline. For the first time in months, Carter felt a sense of clarity. He had been part of something dark, but now he had a chance to make it right. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. He pulled it out, his heart skipping a beat as he saw the message. "The time is now. They're making their move." It was from Alana. Without hesitation, he grabbed his jacket and turned to the team. "It's time," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside him. "We have everything we need. Let's end this." The team moved quickly, efficiently. Alana was already on the phone, coordinating with the federal agents who were positioned across the city. Their goal was clear: expose the system for what it truly was, an operation built on human trafficking, using law enforcement as its tool. They had the proof. Now, they would make sure the world saw it. Carter's role was simple. He was the one who knew how the system worked, the one who had been on the inside. His testimony would be the final blow, the last piece of the puzzle that would expose everything. But there was no denying it. He was nervous. The truth he was about to reveal would shake the foundations of everything he had once believed in. The truth was a weapon, and Carter knew all too well that weapons could be dangerous. They made their way to the courthouse, the place where it would all unfold. The streets felt empty, like the calm before the storm. The closer they got, the heavier Carter's heart became. He had seen corruption in all its forms, but he had never seen anything like this. The system that had once promised to protect people had become the very thing that destroyed them. They entered the courthouse, their faces set with determination. As they walked through the hallways, Carter noticed the eyes of the other officers watching them. Some with fear, some with indifference, but none with the confidence they once had. The walls that had protected them were crumbling, and they knew it. Inside the courtroom, everything was set. The gallery was packed, the tension palpable in the air. Journalists filled the seats, cameras flashing as they waited for the proceedings to begin. But Carter's eyes were fixed on the front of the room, on the judge, the prosecutor, and the faces of those who had once been his allies. They were all here now, ready to face the consequences of their actions. The moment the judge walked in, the room fell silent. Judge Harrison, a man whose hands had once been stained with the same corruption they were all here to expose, took his seat. His face was neutral, but Carter could see the sweat beading on his forehead. He knew this wasn't just another case. This was the end of something much bigger than any one person. The prosecutor, Shaw, was sitting at the table, his hands trembling as he reviewed the evidence in front of him. He had been part of the machine, part of the system that had protected these criminals for so long. But today, he wasn't in control anymore. The truth had already begun to take hold, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Alana stood at the podium, her voice steady and clear as she addressed the court. "Your Honor, what we are about to reveal will change the way this city operates. What we are about to expose is not just about the few officers who have abused their power. It's about a system, an entire network, that has used law enforcement as a cover for human trafficking. It's a system that has been operating in plain sight for years, and today, it will come to an end." Her words hit like a thunderclap, reverberating through the room and shaking everyone in it. Carter stood by her side, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment everything would change. The evidence was presented, one piece at a time. Financial records, surveillance footage, testimony from witnesses who had seen it all, each revelation more damning than the last. Shaw tried to object, but his voice was weak, lacking the power it had once held. The game was over, and then it was Carter's turn. He stepped up to the stand, his hands shaking as he took the oath. As he spoke, his words were measured but powerful. He didn't hold back. He told them everything: the names, the faces, the operations, how he had been a part of it, how he had been manipulated, how he had believed in the system that had used him. Every word was a blow to the corrupt system he had once served. With each sentence, the walls that had once protected the criminals around him began to crumble. There was no going back now. When it was over, when the final piece of evidence had been presented, Judge Harrison looked up from the documents in front of him. His face was pale, his hands shaking. The weight of the truth had crushed him, and he knew there was no way to undo what had been done. "All charges against Colonel Alana Briggs are hereby dismissed," Judge Harrison announced, his voice trembling. "And as for the officers involved in this operation, they will be held accountable. An investigation will be launched immediately." The room erupted in chaos. For a moment, Carter stood frozen, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on him. He had helped expose the truth, but now there would be consequences. He wasn't untouchable anymore. He was part of the system that had brought this all down, and yet, as he left the courtroom, he felt a sense of relief he hadn't known in months. The system that had once controlled him, the badge that had once made him feel invincible, had finally been shattered. The truth had won. As Carter stepped outside into the blinding light of the day, he knew this was only the beginning. The fight against corruption would continue, but now there was hope. Hope that one day, law enforcement would be a tool for justice, not a shield for those who abused their power. The hunt was over. The hunters had become the hunted, and Carter, for the first time in his life, was free. If you're shocked by these twists and can't wait for more, hit that subscribe button now. This is just the beginning, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Got thoughts on what's going down? Drop your predictions and reactions in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think will happen next in this wild ride. And if you're loving the action, share it with your friends. Let's get the word out and make sure no one misses this epic journey.